Right, we are back again. If anybody missed the Teams meeting on Friday, we looked a lot at everything we've done in the Ecosystems unit so far, and it'd be well worth going back onto Teams and having a look at that. For now, we are on lesson 3, and we're looking at these objectives here. We're looking at environmental variation, looking at what the causes of environmental variation are, and then we're going to have a quick look at daily and seasonal changes. So, what is environmental variation? Well, when we are born, we inherit characteristics from our parents. That's genetic or inherited variation. That comes in our genes and our DNA. So, for example, our eye colour, our hair colour is all predetermined before we're born. But after we are born, the environment around us can also have an effect on how we look. And we call that environmental variation, or variation due to the environment. Now, if we take a lot of the questions I see are based on plants when it comes to environmental variation. So let's have a look at this one. First of all, we have a tree here. What kind of things does the tree need? Okay, well, the tree needs sunlight, the tree needs water, the tree needs carbon dioxide. Of those three, which one do you think they'll always have enough of? Okay, so sunlight, carbon dioxide, water. Which one do you think they'll always have enough of? Hopefully your answer is carbon dioxide. There's enough carbon dioxide in the water, in the air for any plant. But sunlight, if a tree is growing next to a taller tree or next to the side of a building, or if it's just a particularly cloudy time of the year, it's not going to get as much sunlight. And of course, there are always places that get more rainfall and water than others. So how does that affect a plant? Well, if a plant doesn't have as much sunlight, if a plant doesn't have as much water, then it can't photosynthesize as much, and the plant isn't going to grow as much. The plant isn't going to be as big. So size for a plant can be dictated by things in the environment. So therefore, that is an example of environmental variation. The factors that cause that variation are sunlight or amount of water, but the variation itself is size. We can see here another example of variation. We have some small leaves, we have some big leaves. Plants that live in places where there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of sunlight, they don't need to grow their leaves as big. And they don't need to grow their leaves as big because as their leaves are growing, because there's so much sunlight, when they even get to a small size, they're able to absorb enough to photosynthesize enough to make enough food for the plant. But if that plant grows somewhere where there's less sunlight, the leaves have got to be bigger. So the size of the plant, the size of the leaves can all be determined by the environment rather than the genetics of a plant. Now, quite interesting, if you go out into the woods or the forest or something like that and you actually have a look at plants on the ground as opposed to taller plants or trees, you'll often see that they do have much, much bigger leaves, and that is because they are in the shade. And those leaves need to be bigger to catch more light. So that's plants looked at. Let's take a look at this owl here. What kind of things might affect how that owl looks? Well, we can see the owl carrying some mice away there. So let's think about food. If an owl has lots of food, it's going to be a bigger owl. It's going to put on more weight. It's going to be fatter, if you like. If it's got less food, it's certainly going to weigh a lot less. It's going to be a lot more scrawny. So again, an environmental factor. However, I've used size as an example for both, but let's have a look at what we said for the tree and what we said for the owl. For the tree, we talked about light, we talked about water, okay, or maybe even nutrients in the soil. For the owl, we've talked about food like mice. And what is the difference between those factors? Well, mice are alive, but sunlight and water are not alive. This means that these factors that are influencing our tree or our owl, we can split into two different groups. We can split them into biotic factors, which are things that are alive, and we can split them into abiotic factors, which are things that are not alive. So if we go back to the owl, a biotic factor, which is an environmental factor that's alive, could be the amount of food. It could also be something simple like a parasite or a bacteria that causes a disease. Right now, the owl looks healthy, but if it picks up a bacteria or a virus which is alive that could cause a disease, then it could cause the owl to change the way it looks, maybe lose its feathers, maybe lose weight, okay, show variation, but again, that's due to a biotic factor. So are there any biotic factors that affect trees? Well, when we look at trees, if we get close enough, we might see little things crawling on the leaves like caterpillars or greenfly. These are biotic factors, things that, or we might have, in some places, a giraffe coming and eating all the leaves on the trees. So any kind of animal that feeds on a tree is a biotic factor, an environmental factor, which might change the way that tree looks. If we look at crops and locusts, locusts can do, they can just shred a whole field of crops apart. So animals feeding on trees can cause a great change. When we looked, I think last lesson, we talked about the cactus having spikes on as a way of trying to prevent that. Trees and plants also suffer a lot from viruses, and you'll learn specific viruses when you get into year 9 and 10. But quite often, if you look at a plant or a tree and you look at the leaf, if you can see black patches on the leaf or patches of discoloration, that's usually due to a virus, and that's really harmful for the tree. And it can change not just the way it looks physically, but it can change the size of the tree, because any kind of patch on the leaf, any kind of discoloration, that part of the leaf can't photosynthesize. It doesn't contain what we call chlorophyll, which absorbs the sunlight for photosynthesis. So if a virus causes those patchiness on the leaf, then the leaf itself can't produce as much food for the plant, which can have a knock-on effect to the size, not just the way the leaves look. So when we talk about variation caused by the environment, we try and split it into two groups, biotic and abiotic. Think about abiotic as the weather and the terrain. Okay, so what do I mean by the terrain? Are we in the Arctic where it's all snowy? Are we in mountain regions where it's very rocky everywhere? Are we somewhere where it's very damp and moist? And think about the adaptations or the effect that might have on an animal. When we talk about biotic factors, it's anything that's alive. Are the predators in the area? Are the prey in the area? Is the disease? So, but they are all things that affect an animal after it's been born, separate to the genes, the genetics. The other learning objective was to describe daily and seasonal changes. Well, seasonal changes are fairly straightforward, and there's usually just one main example we have for seasonal changes, and that's going back to trees. At primary school we all learned the difference between evergreen and deciduous trees, evergreen holding onto the leaves all year round and deciduous trees not. Well, why does a deciduous tree suddenly decide that it's going to get rid of all its leaves? Well, it decides that because it detects the changes in the environment. It detects the drop in temperature as we come towards winter or autumn. It detects the drop in light levels. Okay, so those environmental factors cause that tree to give a response, and that happens seasonally. In the plants unit, you may have looked at certain seasonal triggers for causing seeds to grow. So, for example, some seeds of some plants will only start to grow after they've detected, if you like, freezing or detected freezing temperatures, and they'll grow after that period, and that ensures that those seeds of those plants grow after winter, because in winter that's obviously when you get your low freezing temperatures, and then they will grow after that, to make sure that as the plant is growing, then it doesn't die from the frost. Right, and daily changes. Very little in terms of daily changes. Really, we look at plants opening and closing the flowers throughout the day and night. Now, why would a plant do that? Why would a plant bother opening its flower during the day and closing its flower at night? Well, we know that flowers are there for bees to come in as they're looking for the nectar, they can pick up the pollen, they can take that to another plant. They're there for reproduction for the plant, right? They're there to be pollinated by insects or by the wind, okay? But during the daytime, insect-pollinated plants aren't being pollinated because the insects aren't out, okay? The insects aren't looking around at that time of day. So a plant being open is fine. However, it's losing water and it's exposing itself to larger animals that might come and eat that flower, okay? So if during the nighttime these flowers close up, it adds just a little extra protection and it conserves just a little bit more water for that plant. So when the daytime comes and the bees are out again, the plant can open up. So that's what we might call a daily change in response to something in the environment, which would be, in this case, sunlight. Now we have here adaptations that nocturnal animals have. So for example, nocturnal animals have brilliant hearing, sometimes fantastic eyesight, etc. I wouldn't necessarily say that that should be classed in with environmental variation though. What I mean by that is an animal that has superb eyesight because it's nocturnal doesn't have bad eyesight during the day and then suddenly develop the physiology for superb eyesight at night. It doesn't change the way it looks at night to have those adaptations. Those adaptations are genetic, they are inherited. When we are talking about environmental variation, we are talking about how our body changes because of the environment. So if you've read that on the screen there, that does come from your textbook, but that might provide a little bit of confusion. Right, that to me would still be inherited variation. So that wasn't a very long lesson today. There's some worksheets that come along with this video. Just one more, sorry. Going back to plants. When we have a look at the plants here, we can see that they're mainly blue. Yeah, the ones I'm hovering my mouse over are mainly blue. If I hover over this little area here, you can see there's a little tinge of pink. And these plants, hydrangea, if you go to somebody's garden, one part of the country might see, well, they're all lovely blue. You go to somebody else's house in another part of the country, and you might think, oh, they're all pink. And what's going on there is the acidity of the soil. One of the first units you'll have done in Year 7 is acids and alkalis, and you'll have looked at indicators that go different colours, whether or not they're placed in an acid or an alkali. And we can make indicators from any kind of brightly coloured vegetable or leaf, etc. And what we see is that the acidity of the soil is causing these chemicals act as indicators in the leaf of the plant to go different colours depending on the acidity of the soil. So again, that is the environment, not the genes of the plant, the environment of the plant directly affecting how that plant appears. So I should have put that one in. Right, so there'll be some worksheets along with this, and there'll be another video on Wednesday. And remember, go back if you missed that Teams meeting, because we talked an awful lot about this topic on Friday. Bye-bye.